Hello everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Today we're going to follow a dramatic moment in Hana's life. Just when she begins to feel safe again with Tuan by her side, her cruel ex-husband Nam is secretly searching everywhere to find her. Will Hana finally rebuild a peaceful life, or is danger already getting closer than she thinks? Stay with us to discover what happens next. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. The early morning sun slowly spread across the small village, warming the quiet fields and the narrow dirt paths between the houses. Birds were already singing in the trees, and the air carried the familiar scent of fresh soil and green vegetables growing in the gardens nearby. For most people in the village, it was just another peaceful morning. But inside Hana's small house, something unexpected had just happened. Hana slowly opened her eyes as the soft light entered through the wooden window. For a moment, she felt confused. The room looked different. The floor was clean. The table that had been covered with dust the night before was now neatly arranged. Even the broken chair in the corner seemed to have been fixed. She sat up slowly, looking around the room with surprise. "Did I clean all of this yesterday?" she whispered to herself. Before she could think further, she heard a faint sound coming from outside the house. It sounded like someone was moving something heavy. Hana quickly stood up and walked toward the door. When she stepped outside, she froze. Standing near the small fence in front of the house was Tuan. He was holding a hammer in one hand and carefully fixing the loose wooden gate that had been broken for days. For a moment, Hana could not say a word. She simply stood there, staring at him in disbelief. "Tuan?" Hearing her voice, Tuan turned around. When he saw Hana standing there, he paused for a moment, then gave her a gentle smile. "You're awake," he said calmly. Hana slowly walked closer, still unable to hide the surprise in her eyes. You came back." Tuan nodded quietly. "I came back early this morning." Hana looked around the yard again. The broken fence had been repaired. The weeds in the small garden had been cleared. Even the pile of firewood beside the wall had been neatly stacked. "You did all of this?" she asked softly. Tuan shrugged a little. The house needed some fixing. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Hana suddenly felt a strange warmth rising in her chest. Over the past days, she had felt nothing but fear and uncertainty. Every sound outside had made her nervous. Every stranger passing by made her wonder if it was someone sent by Nam. But now, seeing Tuan standing there again, everything felt different. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. Tuan placed the hammer down and walked a few steps closer. "I know," he replied. Then he looked at her seriously. "But from now on, you won't have to face everything alone." Hana's eyes widened slightly. Tuan continued in a calm voice, "I'm staying here." The words were simple, but they carried a quiet determination. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he added. For a moment, Hana could not speak. She had spent so much time trying to stay strong that she almost forgot what it felt like when someone truly stood beside her. A soft voice suddenly broke the silence. "And Hana!" Both of them turned toward the road. Little Maya was running toward the house with excitement. Behind her were Ms. Huan and Mr. Day, walking at a slower pace while carrying baskets filled with vegetables. Maya ran straight toward Hana and hugged her waist. "Aunt Hana, we brought vegetables," she said happily. Hana smiled and gently patted the little girl's head. "Thank you, Maya." When Ms. Huan noticed Tuan standing near the gate, she stopped walking for a moment, clearly surprised. "Oh, Tuan?" Tuan nodded politely. "Good morning, Chi Huan." Ms. Huan looked at the clean yard and then back at him. "So you came back?" Tuan simply replied, "Yes." Mr. Day set the baskets down and looked around with a small smile. "Well, the place looks a lot better now." Ms. Huan walked closer to Hana and lowered her voice slightly. "You must feel more relieved now," she said gently. Hana nodded. "Yes, I do." For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Miss Huyen clapped her hands lightly, as if to change the mood. "All right," she said cheerfully. "No more standing around. We still have work to do." She pointed toward the garden behind the house. "Hana, come help me pick some vegetables. The sweet potatoes at the market are selling well today." Hana hesitated. "Do we really need to go to the market today?" She still felt a little nervous about leaving the house. Miss Huyen seemed to understand her concern immediately. "That's exactly why you shouldn't stay here alone," she said kindly. She glanced toward Tuan. "With all of us together, there's nothing to worry about." Mr. Day nodded in agreement. "And the market is busy today. No one will notice anything." Tuan looked at Hana and spoke calmly. "I'll come with you." Hana looked at him again. "Really?" Tuan nodded. "Yes." A small smile slowly appeared on Hana's face. "All right." Soon the small group moved toward the garden behind the house. Miss Huyen showed Hana which vegetables were ready to be picked. Maya ran around happily, occasionally pulling out small weeds and proudly showing them to the adults. Tuan and Mr. Day quietly loaded baskets with vegetables and sweet potatoes. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. The sunlight grew warmer. The sound of laughter filled the small garden. It almost felt like the difficult days had finally passed. But far away from that quiet garden, someone else was thinking about Hana. Nam sat inside a small roadside tea shop, tapping his fingers impatiently on the wooden table. Across from him sat his mother, looking equally irritated. "We've searched almost everywhere," she complained. Nam's eyes were cold. "She can't hide forever." He leaned closer to the shop owner who had been serving them tea. "Have you seen a woman named Hana around here?" he asked. The old shop owner frowned as he tried to remember. "Hana?" Nam placed a small amount of money on the table. "Just think carefully." The man scratched his head slowly. "Well, I'm not sure about the name." Then he paused. "But a few days ago, someone mentioned a young woman staying near the old vegetable gardens outside the village." Nam's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which gardens?" The man pointed vaguely toward the direction of the fields. "Somewhere near the western side." Nam slowly stood up. A cold smile appeared on his face. "Good." He turned toward his mother. "Let's go." Meanwhile, Hana and the others were finishing their work in the garden, unaware that somewhere not too far away, Nam had just found a new clue. The baskets were finally full. Sweet potatoes, fresh vegetables, and a few bundles of green herbs were neatly packed and ready to be taken to the market. The small garden behind Hana's house looked lively after the morning of work. The soil had been turned, the weeds were gone, and the rows of vegetables stood clean and bright under the warm sunlight. Miss Huyen wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the baskets with satisfaction. "That should be enough for today," she said. Mr. Day lifted one of the baskets and tested its weight. "These will sell quickly," he replied. "People always like fresh vegetables from this garden." Maya clapped her hands excitedly. "I want to come to the market too," she said. Everyone laughed softly. Hana picked up one of the lighter baskets and looked toward Tuan. "Is this too heavy?" she asked. Tuan walked over and gently took the basket from her hands. "I'll carry it," he said. "You should just walk with Maya." Hana tried to protest. "But I can carry it." Tuan simply shook his head. "You've already worked enough this morning." There was no argument in his voice, just quiet determination. Miss Huyen watched the two of them and smiled faintly. "Well," she said teasingly, "it seems someone is making sure you don't work too hard today." Hana felt her face warm slightly but didn't reply. Soon the group began walking toward the village market. The narrow dirt path stretched between small fields and vegetable gardens. Farmers were already working in the distance, and the quiet morning had slowly turned into a busy day. Maya skipped happily along the path, sometimes running ahead and sometimes coming back to hold Hana's hand. The walk to the market took about 20 minutes. As they approached, the sounds of the village grew louder. People were talking, bargaining, laughing, and calling out to customers. The small market was already crowded. Stalls lined both sides of the road, displaying baskets of fruit, vegetables, fresh fish, and homemade food. The smell of cooked rice and grilled meat filled the air. Miss Huyen led them to her usual spot near the entrance of the market. "This place is perfect," she said. "People coming in will see us first." Mr. Day set down the baskets and quickly arranged the sweet potatoes in neat piles. Hana placed the vegetables beside them. Within minutes, the stall looked colorful and inviting. The first customer arrived almost immediately. An elderly woman stopped and looked at the sweet potatoes. "These look fresh," she said. Miss Huyen smiled warmly. "They were picked this morning." The woman nodded approvingly and bought a small bag. Soon more people came. Some bought vegetables, some stopped to talk. Others simply looked around before moving on to the next stall. Hana gradually relaxed as the morning passed. Being surrounded by friendly faces and familiar voices made her feel less afraid. Tuan stood nearby, quietly watching the crowd. From time to time, he helped carry baskets or handed vegetables to customers, but most of the time his eyes moved carefully across the market. He was watching, not in a nervous way, but in a protective one. After about an hour, most of the sweet potatoes had already been sold. Miss Huyen laughed happily. "At this rate, we might sell everything before noon." Mr. Day nodded. "Good harvest, good sales." Maya sat on a small stool beside Hana, happily eating a piece of roasted sweet potato. Suddenly, a stranger stopped in front of the stall. He looked like a traveler, someone who was not from the village. He studied Hana carefully. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Hana?" The question made Hana freeze for a moment. Tuan immediately stepped slightly closer to her. "Yes," Hana replied cautiously. The man scratched his head. "Oh, sorry. I might have mistaken you for someone else." He pointed toward the road. "A man was asking about someone named Hana earlier today." Hana's heart skipped a beat. "A man?" she asked quietly. The stranger nodded. "Yes. He seemed very serious. He even offered money to anyone who had information." Tuan's expression hardened slightly. "Did you see where he went?" he asked calmly. The man thought for a moment. "I think he headed toward the western fields." Then he shrugged. "But the village is big. He might already be somewhere else." The stranger thanked them and continued walking through the market. For a moment, no one spoke. Ms. Huyen looked at Hana with concern. "That must be him," she said quietly. Mr. Day lowered his voice. "So he's getting closer." Hana felt her hands tremble slightly. All the fear she had been trying to forget suddenly returned. Tuan noticed immediately. He placed a reassuring hand on the edge of the stall near her. "Don't worry," he said softly. "He doesn't know you're here." Hana looked up at him. "Are you sure?" Tuan nodded. "Yes." His voice was calm, but his eyes remained alert. "We'll stay careful." Ms. Huyen tried to lighten the mood. "Right now, the best thing we can do is finish selling these vegetables," she said. "Standing around looking nervous will only attract attention." Mr. Day agreed. "She's right." The group slowly returned to work. Customers continued coming and going. The stall became busy again, and the earlier tension gradually faded into the background. But Tuan never stopped watching. From the edge of the market, he could see the road leading into the village. Every time someone new appeared, his eyes followed them for a moment before returning to the stall. Meanwhile, several kilometers away, Nam was walking along a narrow path between the western vegetable fields. His mother followed behind him, complaining under her breath. "I told you we should have searched the market first," she said. Nam ignored her. He stopped near a small hill and looked down at the scattered houses in the distance. Somewhere out there, Hana was hiding, and he intended to find her. But at that very moment, Hana was standing in the crowded market, surrounded by people who cared about her. And only a few steps away, Tuan stood quietly beside her, watching, protecting, and ready to face whatever might come next. Tuan returns to stand beside Hana just when she needs support the most. Early in the morning, he quietly cleans her small house, repairs the broken fence, and promises that from now on, he will protect her. Hana is surprised and deeply relieved to see him back. With the help of little Maya and the kind couple, Miss Huyen and Mr. Day, Hana slowly begins to rebuild a peaceful routine. They work together in the garden, picking vegetables and sweet potatoes before heading to the busy village market to sell their harvest. For a moment, Hana feels safe again, surrounded by people who care about her. However, far away from the market, Nam, her cruel ex-husband, and his mother are still searching everywhere for clues about her whereabouts, determined not to give up until they find her.